I would bet money that you cannot name any former director of national intelligence. That's the role that Tulsi Gabbard is currently in the Trump administration. And the reason you can't is because it's not a public-facing job. It is not something where we're supposed to see this person on TV every day or on their own YouTube channel making videos with sort of revisionist history and fear-mongering about nuclear proliferation. But that is what Tulsi Gabbard did yesterday on her personal YouTube account, which I'm not really sure why she still has, but I wanted to go through the video and kind of talk about some of the misconceptions, some of the fear-mongering, some of the revisionist history of World War II that she's going on here with talking about us dropping the bomb on Hiroshima.
I recently visited Hiroshima in Japan and stood at the epicenter of a city that remains scarred by the unimaginable horror caused by a single nuclear bomb dropped in 1945, 80 years ago. It's hard for me to find the words to express what I saw.
It's hard to find the words, although here's a script I'm reading off of in a background, and I took a camera crew there, whatever.
The stories that I heard, the haunting sadness that still remains. This is an experience that will stay with me forever. This attack obliterated the city, killed over 300,000 people, many dying instantly while others died from severe burns, injuries, radiation sickness, and cancer that set in the following months and years. Nagasaki suffered the same fate. Homes, schools, families, all gone in a flash. The survivors, the hibakusha, they carried the pain of extreme burns, radiation sickness, and loss for decades.
Look, all of this is true. Everything she's saying is true, although I actually think that she's over-exaggerating the number of deaths. I think it was more like 200,000 that died in Hiroshima. So all of it's true. However, it's revisionist in the sense that she's not mentioning what the alternative was, the reason we dropped the bombs on Japan. So in 1945, as we've wrapped up the German part of the war, as Hitler has committed suicide and German troops are surrendering, we still have the Japan theater. So remember, the World War II was not just Hitler, and it was also Japan. You know, Japan started their Imperial Japan started invading China in 1931. And so there's a few things that we need to keep track of in the Pacific part. The Pacific theater of war was responsible for half the deaths in World War II, so 35 million deaths. And Japan specifically, in their invasion of China, it's estimated that they killed 14 million Chinese citizens. So 14 million of those deaths are just at the hands of just Japanese against Chinese people. Okay, so Japan was absolutely a bad guy in World War II. And I guess we just don't talk about Japan as much because they don't have some sort of singular figure like Hitler at the top of it that we remember their name. And as we get further and further away from World War II, this kind of revisionist of sort of we're the bad guys is taking place a lot in roots of the right. We've got Tucker Carlson having so-called historians on his show saying that maybe Churchill was the bad guy in World War II. You've got Tulsi Gabbard doing this kind of thing. We're sort of only talking about the negative consequences of the bomb, but not talking about what the alternatives were. So 1945, Harry Truman had a choice to make. He's like, how are you going to end this war? And he has these nuclear bombs at his disposal that were created during the Manhattan Project as we were actually competing with Germany on creating a nuclear bomb. The estimates of deaths in World War II going into mainland Japan were going to be 100 to 500,000 U.S. troops would die, plus all the civilians, plus all the Japanese deaths. In Okinawa alone, 20,000 U.S. soldiers died, 70,000 Japanese troops died, and an estimated 100 to 150,000 Japanese civilians died. So if you add all that up, that is more people almost than died in Hiroshima alone. So just the Battle of Okinawa, nearly as many people died in that as would have died in the Hiroshima bomb attacks. And so Harry Truman makes a decision that you're just doing math at this point. You're saying this will end the war more quickly than if we go, and with fewer lives lost than if we go into mainland Japan. So this was a numbers game. And some people say Truman had lower number estimations for the number of people that would die in those cities. Regardless, the total number ends up being much less. When you're talking about 200,000 to 300,000 people dying, which is tragic. And I'm not trying to diminish it. I'm just saying 200,000 to 300,000 people dying versus the 35 million people that had already died in that Pacific theater. You've got to end this at some point. You've got to look at beyond the tragedy of just the bomb and look at the tragedy of the entire war where 60 million people were killed.
Yet this one bomb that caused so much destruction on Hiroshima was tiny compared to today's nuclear bombs. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of just 15 kilotons of TNT, whereas today's nuclear warheads range in size from 100 kilotons to over 1 megaton. A single nuclear weapon today could kill millions in just minutes. Just one of these nuclear bombs would vaporize everything at its core: people, buildings, life itself. The shockwave.
Yeah, I mean, this is all true, right? I mean, today's nuclear weapons are much more powerful than the ones that were used in the 1940s. And yeah, they would be bad. That's why we tried for the entirety of the Cold War to not continue to use nuclear weapons. And it's ridiculous to think that anyone wants nuclear war. I mean, we get it. This is why the scary music and stuff.
Would crush structures miles away, killing and maiming countless people. And then comes the fallout. Radioactive poison spreading through the air, water, and soil, condemning survivors to agonizing deaths or lifelong suffering. A nuclear winter could follow, with smoke and ash completely blocking the sun, plunging the world into darkness and cold, killing crops and starving billions. Acid rain would scar the earth, wiping out entire ecosystems. This isn't some made-up science fiction story. This is the reality of what's at stake, what we are facing now. Because as we stand here today, closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation than ever before.
Than ever before? There are several incidents in the 1980s where our NORAD system thought missiles were coming in. It was a mistake. The system was wrong, but we almost launched nuclear weapons back at Russia because we thought we were being attacked. Same thing happened in Russia a couple times where they were on the brink of literally, it came down to one guy not willing to press the button because he wasn't sure that their system was correct. And it turned out he was right. The system was wrong. So we were right on the brink of it. We now know a lot of this stuff that went on in the 1980s, and we know that we were a lot closer than maybe we even thought we were. And so maybe she knows something I don't, although I doubt she would go on YouTube to tell us things that she knew that were national secrets. But I don't see how we're closer today than we were during the Cold War when we were fighting the Soviet Union before they collapsed. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you could say that we're on the brink of nuclear war because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict or the Israel-Gaza conflict. I mean, maybe we are closer because Iran's trying to get a nuclear weapon, but she doesn't mention anything about any specific countries that she's saying are close to pressing that button here.
Political elite and warmongers are carelessly fomenting fear and tensions between nuclear power.
Who is doing this? Who are the political elite and the warmongers who are purposely trying to get us into nuclear war? I would love her to name some names. This would be a good thing. Who are these people? Name them. If you're the director of national intelligence, tell us who these people are that want nuclear war. What would their possible motivation for that be?
Perhaps it's because they are confident that they will have access to nuclear shelters for themselves and for their families that regular people won't have access to.
Okay, wait a minute. You just spent a minute telling us what the devastating consequences of a nuclear blast would be in today's world, or a nuclear war, for example. It'd block out the sun, crops would die, people would starve, you'd have nuclear winter, all these terrible things. And she really thinks that we're going to believe that there's a group of political elite warmongers who this is their plan and they want it because they're going to have a bunker to stay in. I mean, how long would you have to stay in that bunker? Are you expecting your great grandchildren to be able to come out and rule the world? What's the point in having all the money and power if you just have to sit in a bunker for the rest of your life? This makes no sense when you think about it for even 2 seconds. And this is the person that we've put in charge of national intelligence.
So it's up to us, the people, to speak up and demand an end to this madness. We must reject this path to nuclear war and work toward a world where no one has to live in fear of a nuclear holocaust.
Okay, I don't think anyone wants to live in fear of a nuclear holocaust. I certainly don't either. I hope that we never have nuclear war for obvious reasons. But again, what is the motivation here? You've got to look at, why did she take a camera crew to Hiroshima? Why did she write this script? Why did she shoot this video? Why did she put it on her personal video? I think there's probably a good case for the fact that maybe her anti-war stance is not winning, especially in the Russia versus Ukraine theater, where maybe the administration is coming around to realizing that Putin's the bad guy and Putin's just stringing the Trump administration along in these negotiations for peace between Russia and Ukraine. And the common thing that the anti-war people always go to when it comes to Putin and Russia is that, well, you know, you're poking the bear. He might launch a nuclear attack if you don't give him what he wants. And that's just the common refrain that I hear. That might be true, except that doesn't that make Putin the bad guy? Doesn't that make Russia the bad guy if they're threatening to use nuclear weapons if they don't get their way on territorial expansions? We just talked about Japan's territorial expansions. We just talked about Germany's territorial expansions and need for power. And that's what started World War II. Russia wants the same thing now. Putin wants the same thing. He wants to go into Ukraine. And I don't think he's going to stop in Ukraine. No one believes he does. He says he wants to get the Soviet Union all back together. He wants the Soviet Union to be a thing again. There's a lot of countries in that list that now exist independently outside of the Soviet Union. So for her to not call out Russia as maybe the actual person that's putting us closer to the brink of war, or Iran, for example, again, someone who supported Barack Obama's Iran nuclear deal, which was, I think, absolutely a sham. And Trump is actually in some sort of danger of doing the same mistake, believing Iran. Look, yeah, maybe it is more dangerous. We've got 9 countries now that have nuclear weapons. And back then we only had 2. That does make things maybe a little bit more dangerous. But at the same time, what is your goal of accomplishing this? How do we stop nuclear war from happening? I think we have to do that through strength. That's my opinion. I think we have to do it by us saying we will not allow other countries to bully other countries. We've got to protect democracies where they exist. That's why I supporting Ukraine. That's why I support especially doing so with missiles and money and not our own U.S. troops being in harm's way. But look, this is probably her losing that argument to the more hawkish elements of the GOP within the Trump administration. And that's probably why she puts this video out. And if you look at the comments of the video, it's just over and over again, sort of this like, thank you for this video. I mean, it's just, again, I feel like my generation and lower have a really poor understanding of what the political and economic sort of things that led to World War II and also what actually happened in World War II. And she is adding to this noise by claiming that we are closer to nuclear war than we've ever been. That's just not true. I've not seen anyone respectable say such a thing. And so what's the point of this video? I think it's trying to convince people like us that we should be scared of nuclear war and that we should capitulate to Russia. Maybe she's not a Russian agent, but she's certainly a useful idiot for Putin because she's always defending him. She's always throwing out Russian propaganda. Let it sink in that this is the person that is in charge of our national intelligence. That concerns me. It should concern everyone. But again, this is what you get when you hire a bunch of people that are good on TV and not much else.